In chapter 5 of Galatians, Paul writes about freedom in Christ. While Paul did not intend the interpretation given his words, the Judaizers reacted to Paul's teachings, fearing that freedom would give license to the people to act upon their sinful instincts. See, the Greco-Roman world of the New Testament was a lawless, sexually promiscuous world, from the highest to the lowest points of society. So what we see today is not new. We merely use different means. Paul asserts that biblical freedom is not freedom to serve sin. It is not a license to immorality or paganism. Paul's freedom, rather than condoning an opportunity for sin, is a call for love. Paul urges the Galatian believers to, through love, serve one another. Voluntary servitude is the goal of freedom. We are free from the bondage of sin. We are free to serve one another. Service is real love. Now, let's put Paul in context here. The Galatian church was riddled with strife because they had placed themselves under the law rather than the gospel of Jesus. So as Paul helps them understand grace, Paul wants this struggling church to understand that they are not free to serve their fleshly desires. And that's exactly what was happening in Galatia. Here, Paul acknowledges the struggle that modern Christians face today. We have a constant conflict between the flesh and the spirit. We are bombarded with media, people, events that prompt thoughts of lust, revenge, greed, callousness, and cruelty. Jesus told us to love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves, to build a relationship with our Father and with others. So Paul asserts, walk in the Spirit, because he knows that the goal is not to sin less, but to have our lives guided by the Spirit so that we can grow strong enough that when the world's temptations come out to pull us back down, we will be strong enough to pass over, to pass through without falling back to where we were. Paul tells modern Christians that the sin and temptation we face daily comes from within us. Our personalized urges are there when we are weak, alone in the dark. We all have these opposing forces within us. Without walking in and exercising our spirit daily, these temptations will take over. This lesson reveals the relationship between faith in the Spirit and the law and the flesh. Faith in Jesus receives the Spirit of God and salvation. The keeping of the law relies upon our flesh, and the flesh is weak. A man who walks in the Spirit is a man who is not under the law. Now Paul recounts the deeds of the flesh that are plaguing Galatia: immorality, impurity, sensual promiscuity, idolatry, sorcery. Traditional Judaism despised these acts and frowned upon those that engaged in such actions. But Paul didn't stop there with the filthy 5 socially unacceptable sins. He included enmity for your fellow man, strife, jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissension, factionalism, envy, drunkenness, callousness, all acts that were destroying the Galatian church because they were engaged in them. We modern Christians are sometimes eager to ostracize the temptations and sins of others as socially unacceptable. They're more sinful than our socially accepted sin. Paul treats the socially accepted and unacceptable sins as both actions of the flesh, actions that hinder our relationship with God. After Paul recites the failings of the flesh that are plaguing the Galatian church, he turns to the fruits of the Spirit. He challenges them and us, saying that if we walk in the Spirit, we should demonstrate the following: love. Now, I'll pause here because it is fitting that love is the first on his list because it really encompasses all the others. But he goes on to say joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Those with faith in Christ submit to God's will. Our sin and our sinful desires are nailed to the cross with Jesus. In Christ, we can live above the passions and desires of our flesh. This list of the fruits should cause each of us to self-assess. How can we grow in our relationship with God and our fellow man? But also heed the warning of Paul as we walk not to become self-righteous religious snobs, provoking those still developing and envying those with more. That's the lesson for this week. Have a great week. Bye.